Some very big fight announcements for the end of 2025 for the UFC. Some fights taking place before the end of the year. Some fights we don't know yet, but we will talk about when we think those fights will happen. And also, an insane card to end the year for 2025. Violence is taking place on December 13, and we have a very stacked end of the year for 2025 that we want to cover for this episode of The Matchup. Welcome to The Matchup with mmadbm. Appreciate you guys all for being here. We also have a little talk about Jon Jones ripping into Tom Aspinall a little bit, him also talking about the Alex Pereira fight, but we want to get into the fights that we just got announced. Well, not necessarily officially announced, but basically teased by the fighters and told to us by the fighters that these are happening. Starting off, we had Sean Strickland basically confirm that his next fight is going to be against Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. We had Anthony Fluffy Hernandez booked against RDR, Renier de Ritter, a recent card at UFC Vancouver, but he ended up pulling out, and Brendan Allen ended up taking that fight and beating Renier de Ritter in that 5-round fight. Anthony Fluffy Hernandez had an injury, and he is now going to be fighting Sean Strickland. When? We do not know. But Sean Strickland replied to somebody saying MVP is next for him, and he said it's going to be Fluffy. So we basically have Fluffy Hernandez versus Sean Strickland, a very interesting stylistic matchup. Sean Strickland's pretty difficult to grapple overall. He's known to be a pretty decent anti-grappler. But the problem is that Sean Strickland loves to pressure. Sean Strickland loves to be on the front foot and loves to dictate pace himself. Here's the problem with that. You're not going to dictate the pace against Fluffy Hernandez. You are not going to be on the front foot against Fluffy Hernandez. No round in a 5-round fight, in any round of any fight, are you going to be constantly on the front foot against Fluffy Hernandez unless you have some very interesting power to back him up, give him a reason to think about it, and then he'll go back in your face and he's going to pressure you again. No matter what, Fluffy Hernandez is dictating how he wants his fight to go. So Sean Strickland has to be ready to either completely combat that and be willing to stand in the middle with Fluffy the entire time and not give up a back foot, or Sean Strickland's going to be having to completely flip his game plan, fight off the back foot, learn how to fight off the back foot and counter, and get away from getting himself backed up to the cage where Fluffy can constantly take him down. And I honestly don't even think Fluffy needs the cage to take him down. He could take him down on the open mat. Sean Strickland is not going to beat Fluffy Hernandez. Fluffy Hernandez is going to be able to take him down repeatedly. Sean Strickland on the back foot or Sean Strickland not dictating pace, we have seen in both Dricus du Plessis fights. Now, the first Dricus du Plessis fight, Sean Strickland was dictating pace a good amount of it, and he was having a lot of success. In my opinion, Sean Strickland did win that Dricus du Plessis fight in the first fight. But the problem is, Sean Strickland, in that Dricus du Plessis second fight, looked horrible. And it's not necessarily just because, it may be a little bit because of regression, but at the same time, I believe it was more so the game plan. I believe it was more so the execution, because Sean Strickland, in that second Dricus du Plessis fight, was not pressuring Dricus du Plessis. He was not putting on that forward motion the entire fight. He was letting Dricus du Plessis dictate the pace, meet him in the middle, constantly even put Sean Strickland on the back foot. And I think like the 4th round of the first fight, Sean Strickland got taken down by Dricus du Plessis. Looked a little bit exhausted. You don't really see Sean Strickland too tired. Now imagine a fight where the pace is dictated by somebody that's not Sean Strickland. I think Sean Strickland will get tired in that fight. I think there's a way to get Sean Strickland tired, and it would be putting a pace on him and constantly grappling him, as Fluffy Hernandez will do. I don't see anything where Sean Strickland can give Fluffy Hernandez to keep him away enough, to keep him thinking about shooting those takedowns enough. Sean Strickland does have a couple finishes in the UFC, Abus Magomedov being one of them, and then the Brendan Allen finish, I think a couple years prior to that. And I guess they're decent indications. Like, he could hurt a guy to the body. He could definitely push a pace and put some guy in the back foot and keep them thinking, but it's just not the style that Fluffy Hernandez is going to give up. What exactly is Sean Strickland going to be able to do to keep Fluffy Hernandez away from pressuring him the entire fight? If it's a 5-rounder, good luck. If it's a 3-rounder, Strickland needs to win that first round desperately and then see how it goes from there. Make sure that he does not give up footing in that 2nd and 3rd round. I just do not see it. I don't think Fluffy needs to make too many reads and have too many worries about Sean Strickland in that fight, because Sean Strickland does not present a very demeaning power. He does not present some really nasty submission ability. He doesn't present some insane jiu-jitsu. he doesn't present some insane offensive wrestling. I don't really see a stylistic disadvantage other than, I guess, Strickland being decent at stuffing takedowns. I don't really see a stylistic disadvantage for Fluffy Hernandez in this Sean Strickland fight. I think Fluffy Hernandez is going to submit Sean Strickland, or he's going to TKO him. Strickland does do well in grappling positions defensively, but we haven't really seen him in the deep of it. And Fluffy does like to completely smother you at times. And I feel like it'd be one of the more satisfying ones for Fluffy if he were to get on top of Strickland and be able to completely smother him, get him into a mount, push him right back down as Strickland thinks he's getting back up. Another double leg. I feel like Fluffy would take in this beating of Strickland. I feel like this is one that he would love to have, and he's like dreaming of this fight. And I think Sean Strickland's going to have the very, very worst end of a Fluffy Hernandez beatdown in this fight. Another fight that got essentially teased. A fake account, Octagon Pulse, basically put up a little announcement that they usually do, trying to land something. Of Gene Silva versus Arnold Allen at UFC 323. Now, Gene Silva put up something stating that he has a fight booked, and I think it was on his YouTube, and it's happening sooner than we think, and that he didn't expect the card to be this good. So it seems like UFC 323 makes the most sense. December 6th, Gene Silva's been talking about wanting to fight in December, and that UFC 323 card does look pretty good. And now, if we get that Jan Blachowicz versus Guskov fight off of the main card, or maybe something else, I don't know what they would do with the order, but Gene Silva versus Arnold Allen. Gene Silva quote tweeted that Octagon Pulse post with like eye emojis, kind of like partially confirming it. We might actually get Gene Silva versus Arnold Allen on December 6th, literally a month from today. Month's notice, Arnold Allen comes back. Why? First of all, you're out for that long. Arnold Allen fights almost once a year. I think he fought in February against Giga Chikadze, so I guess he'd be fighting twice this year. But why on a 1 month notice? And then you're fighting Gene Silva, of all people. I mean, I guess Gene Silva took a ridiculous amount of damage against Diego Lopez, but I think Arnold Allen is a legit fighter. Do not get me wrong. And he is like a top 7 featherweight in the UFC. But I also think he isn't good enough to be taking these layoffs, especially in a fight where he doesn't take that much damage against Giga Chikadze. I think he did get injured. Maybe unless I'm wrong, but it just seems like every fighter's calling out Arnold Allen, and he doesn't seem to be having an injury during the year. But Gene Silva, I think, is going to knock out Arnold Allen. Arnold Allen got hurt against Max Holloway big at the end of their fight. He's been a little bit weary with his chin. I think Dan Hooker hurting him as well was a little interesting, but he is pretty resilient. I don't think you get cracked by Gene Silva and you get back unless you're Diego Lopez. I don't think anybody takes what Diego Lopez took in that fight, and that's after Diego Lopez did that to Gene Silva in round 1. Arnold Allen does not have the capabilities to grapple Gene Silva like that. He can wrestle, but he doesn't really do anything with the wrestling. There are a lot of fighters in the UFC that can wrestle you, that have a decent wrestling offensive ability, but they don't really do anything with it. And that's why they don't really go to that game often, because once they get a guy down, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to pass guard. They don't know how to distribute their weight. And Arnold Allen, maybe he takes Gene Silva down to switch it up a little bit, especially if he's getting hurt. But I don't think Silva gives him that time. I don't think Silva's going to be able to let Arnold Allen land as often as Diego Lopez did. I don't think he's going to be fighting as recklessly. I do think Gene Silva defensively is like not the greatest in the world. I think he's like a B- defensive fighter at best. And that's being generous in my opinion. You could even go as far as say CC+. But Arnold Allen also isn't the greatest defensively. I think he's not as quick as Gene Silva. If this fight happens at the end of the year, it's a beautiful supplement to that card. Because if we go look at the end of the year card, that is the Merab versus Peter Yan card. You already have on that UFC 323 card, you have Merab Dvalishvili versus Peter Yan. You have Pantoja versus Joshua Van. Brandon Moreno versus Tatsuro Taira. Henry Cejudo versus Peyton Talbot. The prelims, by the way, insane. And then you have Jan Blachowicz versus Bogdan Guskov. I prefer that fight to go to the prelims. It's not as exciting as the other ones. Gene Silva versus Arnold Allen is a beautiful fight to have. Yeah, I feel like even though it's high up in light heavyweight, I would much rather have. I mean, maybe you do Cejudo Talbot off of the main card, but you wouldn't do Henry Cejudo's retirement fight off of the main card. So I think I personally would put Jan Blachowicz and Bogdan Guskov down to the prelims. If you really are adding Gene Silva versus Arnold Allen, I feel like it's a bigger fight, more entertaining fight, and I do think Gene Silva knocks him out. That being added to an already unbelievable UFC 323 card. I mean, let me read you the prelims. Marvin Vettori versus Bruno Ferreira. Possibly a Marvin Vettori chin being cracked situation. Macy Barber versus Karine Silva. I think it's an interesting stylistic matchup because Barber could get grappled on the mat. But Barber could also break Karine Silva on the feet. Edson Barboza versus Jalen Turner. That's a sacrifice. I don't really need to say who's being sacrificed. I feel like you guys know. Nazim Sadikov versus Faris Diem. Insane fight that neither guy should be fighting because they should both be fighting into the top 15 of lightweight. UFC horrible booking, but great fight. And you get to push one of these guys, I guess. Naimov versus Myron Santos. Good fight. Ibo Aslan versus Iwo Barniuski. It'll be okay. Grant Dawson, Manuel Torres. Sick fight. Again, Grant Dawson deserves a much better fight at 155 pounds, nonetheless. Terrence McKinney versus Chris Duncan. That's all gas, no brakes. And Mansour Abdul Malik taking Antonio Tricoli's life. But yeah, sick card already, and you're adding Gene Silva versus Arnold Allen to it. I really hope that gets officially announced. And it seems like everything Gene Silva's teasing is kind of leading to that, so I'm a little bit hopeful for it. But those are, I don't know when Strickland versus Fluffy would happen. I mean, it won't happen on any of these pay-per-views, not 322, which is in 10 days. No, 9 days. And not on UFC 323. Because I mean, if you add Fluffy and Strickland to UFC 323, that would be insane. And Strickland has said he wants to fight this year, but I doubt it. It doesn't seem likely. Probably beginning of next year, fight night main event, Strickland versus Fluffy Hernandez. I think you should put that in a crowd instead of putting it in the Apex again. Strickland versus Fluffy Hernandez, fight night main event. Or you could do it on like a pay-per-view featured fight. But I like it as a fight night main event. But here's why I don't think it could be added to the end of the year card. Like there's the Apex event, December 13. You have Manel Kav versus Brandon Royval being booked for the third time, a main event spot again. There's no way they get rid of that as the main event. And Strickland versus Fluffy would 100% be the main event if they were to book it. But look at this last UFC card of the year. Already, by the way, I told you guys what we have so far to end the year. We have this upcoming card with Randy Brown and Gabrielle Bonfim. There are a couple fun fights. I'm not going to lie. It's going to be relatively entertaining. But then we go to high stakes and entertainment with UFC 322 the following week. I don't need to sell that card for you guys. You guys already know what UFC 322 looks like. Jack Della Maddalena versus Islam Makhachev. Then, the week after, you have UFC Qatar, Sarukian versus Hooker, Bilal Muhammad versus Ian Gary, and a stacked card. The return of Alexander Taporia, and he's fighting Beksa Almakhan. That's a sick fight. A lot of great fights on that UFC Qatar card the week after UFC 322. It's going to be a euphoric 2 weeks for the UFC. And the funny part about it is the fights happen a week apart. Yes, it's 2 separate fight weeks, but on UFC 322 night, we are a week away from UFC Qatar. That's how fun it gets when we have 2 insane cards stacked back to back. Then we get a week off, which sucks. Having a week off before the final 2 weeks of the UFC and then going 3 weeks off at the end of the year, it does suck. We're going to have basically 4 weeks off because you have a whole fight week after once it gets to January. But once you get off of that week off, we go straight into another pay-per-view in Merab versus Yan, UFC 323, an unbelievable card that I just talked to you guys about that might be adding Gene Silva versus Arnold Allen and making featherweight a lot more interesting with its booking because all these other contenders have to start booking their fights. Evloev Lopez, Steve Garcia has to get in another fight. Lerone Murphy versus Volkanovski is probably going to happen. Yair Rodriguez and Aljamain Sterling need to book their fights because the more featherweights that get booked, the more active these top featherweights are. I mean, Yusuf Zalal has to get himself a fight too. The more active these guys are, the less likely the inactives get their opportunity at a title. You're going to blow your opportunity in featherweight if you are not active right now. That's how it's looking. It's the same thing with welterweight. And guess what? All of the welterweights are getting active. Featherweight's going to have to be in the same situation. And guess what? Featherweight, you have a champion that wants to stay active in Alexander Volkanovski. Start booking your fights. Start saying yes to fights and making those statements. Right now, being quiet is not making a statement. There is no privilege at featherweight. And that UFC 323 card is going to add to that if Gene Silva and Arnold Allen get in there. And one of them put on an insane performance, a.k.a. Gene Silva. He comes back, puts on a big name. It's going to be insane. And then right after that, let's talk about this UFC Apex card to close the year. Dana White coined it, saying that they're going to give ESPN a very great show to end the year. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be giving them some gigantic names and some mega fight. No, they're not doing that. But they have a Brandon Royval versus Manel Kape fight, where if Manel Kape wins, you assume he's going to be fighting for the title next. Now, do I believe he's going to be fighting for the title before Tatsuro Taira does? If Taira beats Brandon Moreno, no. But if Brandon Moreno beats Tatsuro Taira and Manel Kape beats Brandon Royval, what do we do there? Because, I mean, even though Kape would be relatively fresh blood, he's already lost to Pantoja, but Moreno's 0-3 against him. But Moreno would be on a, is it 2-fight or 3-fight win streak? He would have beaten Steve Erceg. I think he lost to Royval. He would have beaten Steve Erceg. He would have beaten Tatsuro Taira if he does. I think it would be a 2-fight win streak for Moreno. I don't think it would be a 3-fight win streak if I'm not wrong, right? No, he beat Amir Albazi. I completely forgot about that. Yeah, so I knew there was another fight. 3-fight win streak for Brandon Moreno after beating Albazi, Erceg, and Taira. So Albazi was number 3, I believe, at the time that Moreno beat him. He lost a split decision to Brandon Royval prior to that and a split decision to Pantoja prior to that. So it's not like he's been getting dominated in these fights. And then he goes on to beat the number 3 contender in Amir Albazi. And then he beats Steve Erceg, the former title challenger. Although I get it, he didn't deserve a title fight. He got jumped in there because no one else was there. Whatever. And then he beats Tatsuro Taira, the surging up-and-coming contender, who is literally going to be fighting to fight for the title against Brandon Moreno. If he beats Brandon Moreno, he's fighting the winner of Pantoja versus Van for the title, more than likely. But if we get a Brandon Moreno win and Manel Kape beats Brandon Royval in this last card, we have a couple interesting things to look at flyweight as well. I feel like the UFC has set themselves up to have a lot of very good problems going into 2026. The rest of this card, there are a couple other fights that got booked that are legitimately insane. Kevin Vejos versus Giga Chikadze. Kevin Vejos is going into the... I don't know if Giga's actually still ranked. I was going to say Kevin Vejos is going into the rankings, but I'm not certain if Giga Chikadze is still ranked. Whether or not he is, he's just outside of the rankings. He's been in the rankings for a while. He just fought Arnold Allen, and then David Onama has lost both fights. But it's an interesting stylistic matchup. Giga's still ranked number 15 in the UFC featherweight division. So Vejos going into the featherweight rankings, fighting against Giga Chikadze. Good start to Vejos' career. Really good knockout to start off against Choi, Sungwoo Choi, and then he goes on to, I'm pretty sure it was Sungwoo Choi, if I'm not wrong. Hopefully I didn't botch that. And then, is it Sungwoo Choi? See, now I need to figure this out. But it was, he had an insane knockout to start off his UFC career. And then he goes on against his Danny Silva fight. And Danny Silva gave it to him in terms of just persistence and not going out. And Vejos landed some big shots against Danny Silva. It was Sungwoo Choi. I was right. Didn't botch it. But Danny Silva, really good competition overall for Kevin Vejos. And Vejos looked fantastic. Keep in mind, Vejos is 23 years old. Dealt with a little adversity from Danny Silva. A good amount of shots being landed from Silva. And Silva trying to put the pace on Vejos and not giving Vejos this constant moving forward style that he likes with his boxing. And Vejos still took him down a good amount of times, adjusted his game plan, kept moving forward, listened to his coaches, put on some big shots. I mean, Danny Silva wouldn't go away, but Vejos also wouldn't. And he was landing better combinations, getting good takedowns. He was looking great. 23 years old, going into a fight against Giga Chikadze. He definitely has a height disadvantage in this fight. He's definitely going to be a little bit... He's gonna be struggling at range a little bit against Giga Chikadze for sure. But I think he gets it on the inside pretty well. Another thing, Giga Chikadze doesn't get knocked out either, but he's been taking a lot of damage in his career. Vejos could be a guy to put him out. A lot of power in Vejos' shots. I love the boxing combinations. I love the way he sets up the shots. And when you have really good technique in the boxing and really good technique overall in your strikes like that, they land better, they land harder, and you know how to land them perfectly where you want to land them as well to hurt an opponent, to catch them off guard, and those are the ones that put the guys out. I think there's a very good chance that Kevin Vejos knocks out Giga Chikadze, but this fight's going to be very entertaining, and it's in a small cage. I think that favors Vejos. Morgan Charrier just got booked to fight Melquizael Costa. That is all gas, no breaks. Could Costa try to grapple him? Sure, but Costa isn't the wrestling type. He usually just welcomes the fight to be on the mat, and Morgan Charrier wants to take your head off. If Charrier wants to grapple, which you just basically will never see him do, I refuse to believe Charrier is going to be shooting on Costa. Charrier fighting against Costa is going to be trying to take his head off. Costa's going to be trying to kick his liver in and land some big left hands outside of that. Charrier is hittable. Costa, defensively, not the greatest on the inside, but keeps his distance decently with his kicks. but you could definitely land it on the inside, and Charrier can sometimes get in there. This is going to be a straight-up insane fight between Morgan Charrier and Melchizedek Acosta. It's just violence. It's just violence so far. Joanderson Brito versus Melsik Bagdasaryan. These are two fighters you want that are action fighters. This is an action fight. Brito, Melsik Bagdasaryan. If Brito takes him down, he could submit him if he wants to, butcher him on the mat. If they want to stand, Brito's going to get in on the inside. Melsik's going to want to use his high kick, his left hand. That's basically all he has with his weapons, a jab, a left hand, and a left high kick. He's a southpaw. I'd be surprised if Brito doesn't completely decimate him, but no matter what, we're going to have some entertaining stuff. Plus, Brito coming off of that Pat Sabatini loss, I'm pretty certain that Brito isn't going to be keen on grappling too much in this card. Maybe he would, but he's going to want to take a head off, and you know how Joanderson Brito fights. I can't wait for that one either. And now, this one doesn't seem like as insane of a fight, but Amanda Lemos versus Jillian Robertson. Amanda Lemos versus Jillian Robertson. It's a very classic striker versus grappler matchup where Amanda Lemos can punish with a ninja choke. She has a pretty good ninja choke overall. She has a good front choke to threaten you any single time you want to shoot in on her, get in on the clinch, be a little bit lazy with it. Robertson isn't necessarily the laziest with her grappling with the clinch. She's very active, and she's one of the best grapplers when it gets to the mat, and she's getting better and better on the feet, a little bit more persistent, and her wrestling is looking better and better. Lemos' wrestling is horrible, and she can get taken down. Has a really good guillotine, really good front chokes, as I said. But she could also hurt Robertson badly on the feet if she can avoid getting taken down. So I think that one is also going to be very violent. I think Jillian Robertson either gets Lemos on the mat and absolutely destroys her. I mean, finishes her with nasty elbows. With Robertson, by the way, will land elbows on you, and she's going to use those 12-6. She is vicious on the mat. She's one of the most vicious women MMA fighters when it gets to getting you down. I would say positionally one of the best grapplers on the mat in women's MMA, if not the best, and also the most punishing women's MMA grappler when on top. Whether it's going to be via submission or via ground and pound, knows how to distribute her weight, hips in very solid when she is on top in a mount. I think Jillian Robertson could destroy Amanda Lemos on the mat, or Amanda Lemos can hurt her badly on the feet. That's a sick fight in my opinion. Sold myself on it even more than I did entering talking about it. But that end of the year card is going to be a fun one for the UFC and a fun one to part with ESPN. And I think the UFC is doing a good job. I still think they're probably going to add a couple fights because the rest of the card is okay. If we go look at the rest of that card, apart from the ones I just listed, because I highlighted those because those are the best fights that we've seen so far on the card. They have Luana Santos versus Melissa Cronin, not that great. Kennedy and Nzechukwu versus Marcus Buchecha is like all but confirmed on that one. Buchecha is going to either try to submit him or Nzechukwu is going to hurt him on the feet. I'm not too keen on that fight. Cesar Almeida versus Cesare Olejniczak. Jamie Lynn Horde versus Teresa Bleda. Steven Aspinall versus Sean Sharaff. And AJ Fry versus Guilherme Pat. I don't know what. I mean, there are a couple debutants on that I have not seen yet. I don't know why they're putting so many, especially against themselves. I'm not. The rest of the card isn't the greatest, but the bulk of the card, the meat of the card, cinema. Going on to John Jones to end off the show for today. We're going to go into what John Jones has been saying, finally kind of breaking his silence on the Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane fight, and also what he wants to do and why he wants that UFC White House fight against Alex Pereira. Going into the Tom Aspinall comments, he rips Tom Aspinall, calling him one-dimensional. He was talking about the Tom Aspinall 1-2 being very, very good. That Tom Aspinall's 1-2 down the pipe, very fast, very explosive. That's where Tom Aspinall gets his finishes. He lands a beautiful 1-2 that he times down the pipe on you. That's way too quick for a lot of heavyweights to react to. But then John Jones showcased it that Aspinall wasn't really able to touch Cyril Gane too much with his damaging shots, with his 1-2, and that Cyril Gane was basically looking for that 1-2. And with a 1-2 down the pipe, with a guy with Cyril Gane circling the cage and circling it very well, trying to lure Aspinall in to explode, trying to catch Aspinall off guard, trying to give Aspinall a little bit more to think about and to frustrate him more and more, I think it was a very good game plan from Cyril Gane. And John Jones highlighted that Aspinall's 1-2 wasn't landing down the pipe because Cyril Gane was circling around and that Aspinall wasn't able to land on him. That's very smart because a 1-2 down the pipe is looking for a guy in front of you. If you're going to land a 1-2, it's going to have to be a little bit of an angle if the guy's constantly moving in circles, and you're going to have to time it on the guy moving in the circle to land it exactly how you want to without him getting out of the way as well. It's very difficult to land it on a guy coming on the round. And also, Cyril Gane is a very quick heavyweight in and of himself, and a good counter-striker heavyweight, good off the back foot, good at distance, good at keeping his distance, and something that Tom Aspinall had not fought yet. And John Jones calls Tom Aspinall overrated, saying that his grappling and wrestling is overrated, saying that apart from that 1-2, the rest of his game is pretty empty. Because really, if we look at Tom Aspinall, in my opinion, he is still the most skilled heavyweight we've ever seen. But his wrestling, apart from against Alexander Volkov, which, I mean, anybody who has any sort of mildly decent offensive wrestling takes down Alexander Volkov throughout the entirety of his career. Especially as we've seen against Jailton Almeida, with Jailton Almeida completely exhausted and still getting him down. Then you have Aspinall's jiu-jitsu. Again, he used it against Andrei Arlovsky. He used it against Alexander Volkov. The problem is heavyweight doesn't have a talent pool to give us a reason to assess how good a guy actually is. When a guy decimates every other heavyweight with better skills, it just seems like they're that much better. And I guess John Jones is kind of right in saying Aspinall's wrestling and jiu-jitsu are a little bit overrated. I would not say that Aspinall's wrestling is better than John Jones's. However, again, if I go back to John Jones's fight against Stipe Miocic, stinker. Straight stinker. I mean, Jones looked horrible in that fight, both in the wrestling and the striking, the speed, etc. I'd be shocked if Aspinall doesn't land that 1-2 down the pipe, and Aspinall did look explosive against Gane. I still want to give Aspinall the benefit of the doubt of him being on this giant layoff and coming in to fight a stylistically rough matchup for him, especially when he is a majority one-round fighter. Not saying he can't fight across the entire fight. We don't know yet. I'm not going to completely jump in on that wagon of Aspinall is going to gas after 5 or he quits or whatever it is, because we just don't know how Aspinall looks across 5. But after the first round, we want to see how Aspinall looks. And he's not used to leaving the first round, and he fights that stylistic disadvantage, and he gets knuckle-deep poked in the eye. A lot went wrong, and a lot of nerves happened, whatever it is. It was just a very bad day, an unlucky day for Tom Aspinall. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. We'll see what happens in that Cyril Gane fight in the rematch. One-dimensional, I don't believe so. However, his hands and his striking, really when you break down Tom Aspinall's game, is the 1-2. And apart from the 1-2, I can't disagree with John Jones too heavily because we haven't seen much else. Now, is it because we haven't seen much else? Or is it because the 1-2 has worked for Tom Aspinall against basically every single opponent he's had in the UFC? The one time it didn't work, we're starting to rip on him, but we didn't really get to see more of his tools. And he landed 27 significant strikes to Cyril Gane's 30. It's not like it was that wide off of a gap. But I think we saw the bloody nose. We saw a little bit of adversity for Aspinall for the first time. He didn't walk through his opponent in 2 minutes. Wow. And then he, had to pull out of the fight and made it a lot worse for him. The narrative for Aspinall, it's not looking great. And John Jones has every upper hand right now. And then John Jones talks about the Alex Pereira fight and wanting to fight at the White House. And now both guys have said this now, John Jones and Alex Pereira, talking about how this fight between Alex Pereira and John Jones has no loser. Nobody loses in this fight. They're both a similar age. Neither of them will have a title. No one's cutting weight. It's at heavyweight. Nobody loses in the fight. That is downplaying the fight for every MMA fan. That's the problem with booking Jones and Pereira. The only problem with booking John Jones and Alex Pereira is because we already know there's no loser. But it's the fact that both guys are insisting that there's no loser. Now, I could play it for you that there is a loser in this fight, and it would be John Jones. If Alex Pereira loses to John Jones at heavyweight, not a soul in the world is going to blame Alex Pereira, is going to rip on him, is going to take away from him, whatever it is. But if John Jones loses to Alex Pereira in Alex Pereira's heavyweight debut, no title on the line, he gets his first loss in MMA, which, again, he won't. He will absolutely destroy Alex Pereira, get him down. But if he were to, it is horrible for Jones's legacy. It is horrible considering how Merab and how Makhachev are climbing. How Topuria, in my opinion, is also potentially climbing to be the greatest. If Alex Pereira beats John Jones, he could be listed as the greatest of all time. I legitimately think there are 3 UFC fighters who could become the greatest of all time with one more fight. I think Islam Makhachev, if he beats Jack Della Maddalena, is the greatest of all time. I think Alex Pereira, if he beats John Jones, is the greatest of all time. Or if he beats anybody for the heavyweight title. I believe Ilya Topuria, if he beats Islam Makhachev, is the greatest of all time, especially if he becomes 3-division champion. Jon Jones is close to losing the one thing that he has that's essentially unanimous, that he's the greatest of all time, apart from anybody who excludes drug cheats, which I agree, if anybody's ever popped for a steroid, they shouldn't be, but the consensus is Jon Jones is the greatest. But Jon Jones, if he loses to Alex Pereira, in my opinion, automatically not the greatest of all time. I think Makhachev beating Jack Della Maddalena makes Makhachev the greatest of all time. And then if Jon Jones loses to Pereira, it only solidifies that. I don't think anybody would be arguing otherwise, especially within recency. I think Jon Jones has a lot to lose coming back to fight. But it's not like he has much of a risk against Pereira. Okay, Pereira can walk him down and hurt him bad, and you never know with Alex Pereira, I guess. I guess you should never count out Alex Pereira, even if it is going up to heavyweight. But I legitimately believe Jon Jones is a single leg within the first 5 seconds away from ending the fight against Alex Pereira. The no one loses thing also stops selling the fight. It literally takes away from the sale of the fight. Why would you want fans to... I mean, would you put that on a poster? No one loses. No. No, you don't want to sell a fight with no stakes. You don't want to sell a fight that it's just for pure entertainment. Look at Mayweather selling his exhibition fights. They're not as entertaining. No one really cares about them. Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul. A lot of people watched it. How many people were really in anticipation for anybody really doing anything of substance? Nate Diaz versus Jake Paul, same thing. A lot of these Jake Paul fights where a lot of people are convinced that they're not going to hurt each other too big. Which I'm not on that side, but when you have these gimmick fights, it's essentially the UFC trying to put on a gimmick fight without listing it as a gimmick fight, and they're just saying no one loses. That's a gimmick fight. That's essentially an exhibition. Even though they're going to try to take each other's heads off, don't get me wrong, but you can't just put no one loses. You can't take away the stakes from, in my opinion, one of the biggest fights you could put on in MMA history in Alex Pereira versus Jon Jones, two of the biggest stars that have ever existed in the sport. Especially with Alex Pereira now being light heavyweight champion and willing to vacate it to go up to heavyweight to fight Jon Jones. Basically a retirement fight for both. That's not a no one lose fight. That's not a nobody loses fight. One person gets to walk off into the sunset on a win over one of the greatest of all time between the two, and the other one loses at the end of their career, probably not feeling the greatest about ending their career like that. But at the bare minimum, they get a lot of money, big paycheck on a White House card. You know, it's as salvageable as it gets. I don't like coining it as a no one loses fight. I don't think it's a no one loses fight. And I do think we should have it. Yeah, I want to see what happens. Again, the UFC has so many good problems going into 2026, especially into this White House card. Apparently, it might happen sooner than we expected, which it went from July 4th to June 28th to June 14th, and now it might happen even sooner. So now we might be getting fights for the White House being booked even sooner. We'll figure out what happens more with those. We'll see if we get a date on Sean Strickland versus Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. Any more fights being added to Royval versus Kopp at the end of the year. And also to see maybe Gene Silva and Arnold Allen does get confirmed for UFC 323. Appreciate you guys all for watching as per usual. Like and subscribe. Comment below if you have any questions, comments, or anything in particular that you want to see added onto the show. Any segments you might like to see as well. I did get a nice idea for a segment to add on. My Sundays and Mondays will have very consistent segments as well that you guys will be able to watch. So every Sunday and Monday you will be looking forward to the very same segments. I'll even explain them a little bit here. Every Sunday we'll do top 5 takeaways from, also Tuesday I'm going to announce that as well. Every Sunday I have a top 5 takeaways to start off the episode from Saturday's card. So my top 5 takeaways from Saturday's card, must see matchups from Saturday's card, must cut fighters if any from that Saturday card, my wins and whiffs, so my best predictions, my worst predictions, why I hit and why I missed, and the ladder would be any ranking changes that I would make based off that card, and maybe some looks at some rankings, maybe taking some fighters off of the rankings, etc. So those would be my Sundays and my Sunday segments. My Monday segments will be Fab 5, top 5 predictions for that upcoming Saturday's card. Now, if there's no card that Saturday, we'll obviously replace that with something, because that whole Monday segment is going to be basically around there. Fight of the night prediction, performance of the night prediction, so breaking down essentially like the bulk and the peaks of the upcoming card. Pain and gain, will be somebody where which fighter has the most to lose, the most pain, and which fighter has the most to gain, and then the fight with the most on the line, or the fights with the most on the line. I have a little bit to mix in with pain and gain on the line. They kind of sound similar, but they will be very distinct, I promise. And then Tuesdays will be Hot Take Tuesday. It'll be everybody's hot takes from the prior card or any MMA hot takes in general. And I'll give you guys a couple days to give me your hot takes on that. So every Tuesday I'll be reading only comment hot takes from the Discord or my TikTok comments. So we'll go from there. And then Wednesday will be like a top 10 anything for the most part. I just did ranking the UFC, every single main card for the UFC this year. That's another one. But yeah, that's what I wanted to let you guys know. Those are like official segments right now. We'll see what I'll do for the rest of the week. But yeah, like there's always going to be news in the middle. So like if there's some big news to be listed, like I'll toss them in the middle, or maybe even make the episode longer. Those segments will always be there, and then we'll also have news to be covering. Nonetheless, appreciate you guys all for being here. As per usual, I will see you guys tomorrow in tomorrow's episode, which will be at the regular time at 5 in the morning Eastern time, 2 a.m. Pacific, and what would that be now with daylight savings? I think like 10 or 11 p.m. a.m. for the UK. Appreciate you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace out.